Okay, so this is just in the video screen because of the victory dance. Another item sold. You know, you da 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 da. Anyways, VS Code is a fucking joke. You know, all the people commenting about it and talking about how you could do the same thing in Vim in that video. This is a joke of a text editor. It is a fucking toy. It's a fucking, easy bake oven of text editors. And I'm fucking done with it. It's a fucking joke. I mean, the thing that's so fucking funny to me about VS Code at the end of the day, and what's even funnier about it is that it keeps going. So, anyways, there's more about it too, other than just the first point. But the first thing that I wanted to say about this dog shit. Well, actually, that's an insult to dog shit. At least it fertilizes something. VS Code is awful. It's even worse. But this terrible piece of shit, janky, fucking huge, bloated behemoth of a fucking shit pile of a text editor is over 300 fucking megabytes in size, and that is because, this whole effort to hold up the entire world on the back and the foundation of JavaScript is a fucking sick joke. Node is a pile of shit. So is Electron. And if you do your application or program in Electron, it is automatically, because of that, a piece of shit. It's awful, and you should be ashamed of yourself as a company and as an individual for using it. It is time to put JavaScript out to pasture. It's a terrible language. It always has been. And, the end users can feel it. And I'm one of them. I just ordered the book on Rust. I know that I probably won't be able to do it all by myself, but I want to rewrite your awful pieces of software and web apps inside of it and with it, and re-release them in something that won't use such a massive amount of memory at the end of the day. VS Code, I'm not targeting it, but it's a piece of shit. It is a piece of dog shit. Although, like I said, that's an insult to dog shit. At least it will fertilize the daffodils. You know, what will VS Code achieve? But for bloating people's systems and slowing them down. Oh hey, K-Lite has an update. If only the combined community codec pack would keep their shit up to date. You. No. Where'd you go? Yes. This is making my video take longer, and I don't need it for anything, it's just a pop-up screen. Anyways, but no, VS Code, it is 300, like, if you load it up, it's at least 300 megabytes of memory, in size. It's just absurd. It's such a crappy, vile, awful, program, and it's absolutely enormous in size and scope, and it's absolutely huge. And by the way, as you see in here, I downloaded some guys like videos on algebra, so I need to start practicing that. But the problem with VS Code, it's huge. It's at least and it gets even more hilarious. From there, from it being absolutely huge. Microsoft, has been labeling it lightweight, which is a joke. I mean, Qt BitTorrent is lightweight. What the fuck is VS Code? It's a janky. it's made out of this JavaScript, framework, Electron, which is absolutely enormous. It ships with a fucking instance of Chrome right up in it, and that Chrome is being pointed at a JavaScript website, with the just absolutely enormous, and everything. And what the thing that blew my mind is that I found out, discussion wise, and I was following a lot of the chatter among programmers because I didn't know this, I didn't realize this. I was naive, but they were talking about how, in the old days and everything, we didn't even see a lot of this coming because, doing anything inside a browser was just absolutely enormous and was seen as a big and mammoth task to actually do. We didn't think that we would have our hands on this much firepower to do it. And I was like, what is so heavy about a web browser? Why is it so mammoth? And then, I found out the details. Like, each one of these is basically its own separate virtual machine in each and every tab that is isolated from each other. JavaScript has to be set up in such a way that if it's got, the code, it can keep running even if there are problems with it, and everything. It doesn't just crash. It uh, will output errors gracefully without fully crashing, and will keep functioning and everything despite the problems with it and everything. And that's how the language was designed, because you didn't want your websites crashing and burning and just shutting down and everything. You needed 99.9% uptime with it. But no, they were talking about how this idea of doing everything in the browser was seen as a utopian, a dream that would only happen if we had our hands on a ton and ton of firepower at everything. And the web was so insecure at the end of the day that we had to put all kinds of add-ons and implement all kinds of security features into our browsers to make them so that these threats that were prevalent with it didn't hit our systems and everything. And you know I started finding out how massive they were and everything in size and everything. But no, they were talking about this. But one of the single biggest factors in all of this has to be, that at the end of the day, all of this is done in a crappy, you know, in a very crappy language and everything, which is JavaScript, and that uses a ton of memory to do what it does. I mean, the thing that's so funny about JavaScript too is that it's supposed to be, this way of not making the programmer think about memory, but so it obscures it from them, so they don't think about it. They're not supposed to. That's not supposed to be on the minds of a JavaScript developer. But you only need to go over into the task manager to see, Blue Sky takes up 800, eBay takes up another 500, Similar Worlds another, 700 since we're rounding, YouTube is another 600, and everything. And it's just an absolutely enormous amount of random access memory. And so programmers, thought, for a long time that, it would be a miracle to be able to do everything in the browser because they knew this. They were aware of this particular limitation for a long time. And so that was the discussion, that was happening about all of it, that web browsers, were not really an efficient way of doing things. They were, pushed after layer after layer after layer of abstraction away from, the hardware. They were so distant from it, and it seems that it takes 200 meg of memory just to print hello world on the screen with this language, which is funny because, in other programming languages it wouldn't even take, so we're talking, 200 million bytes, for the record. The same amount could be, written in a sensible language in about, without even needing, 20,000, bytes of memory, so 20 kilobytes, in a sensible language to print hello world on the terminal. it doesn't take much, and yet here we have a language that it takes, an enormous amount of memory and an enormous memory footprint to do the same thing inside the browser and everything, which is, a joke. I mean, you've got separate instances of Firefox running for all three of these windows, and you can see it in the task manager if you open it up. If you open up in View in your Process Explorer, you can look and see, like, it's supposed to be one, but I mean, look at all this. This is all, all these instances of Firefox, just running at the same time for the few websites that I'm at, site after site after site after site, and they're eating up just an absolutely enormous amount of memory, for all of it. And it's not just Firefox that's doing it. It's not just that Firefox is so big, it's that these websites, if you want even more granular detail, you can go to your browser's task manager, and then you can see it's big, not necessarily because of Firefox, which is big in and of itself, but because all these websites, they use an enormous amount of memory to do what it is that they do. And so, JavaScript is a joke. It is a toy programming language or toy scripting language that has been extended beyond, the limits that it should have been subjected to, that it should have stayed within. There has been this determination by web soy devs to, break the language out of its normal limitations and extend it out. And so I have the inverse opinion to most of these devs. Node is not an improvement. This is not JavaScript getting well. It is JavaScript becoming more and more unhealthy. JavaScript is pushing into realms that it is not welcome in, that it is not wanted in, that the developers that are releasing the code for, please stop. Just stop. No one wants your fucking shitty programs. No one wants them. Just stop. Like, I would honestly prefer no apps to these goddamn Electron apps, we don't want your JavaScript. We don't want it. It's a language that, when the script runs, it runs in a very bloated fashion. The same amount of things can be done in the terminal and far less memory. So anyways, if you know a good USB-C external webcam and everything, go ahead and send those recs. But anyways, VS Code is a bloated piece of shit, and the thing that's really funny about it is that Microsoft was trying to be lightweight. They were trying to say, oh, we're not going to ship a compiler with it. It's a joke. It is a fucking joke. They said they were going to they deliberately set it up so that you could bring your own compiler, scenario and everything, and to be lightweight with that. And then, a bunch of people commented how bloated it was. And then this other alternative project and fork got made of VS Code, VS Codium, which is funny because there's a community that's rebelling against the whole thing and, freeing, the whole thing from Microsoft and everything. But they're a joke too because it's still bloated even after you remove all the bloat from that you can from it, because the problem with VS Code is not that it's got all this other additional software that comes with it. The problem with VS Code at the end of the day is that it's an Electron app. It's done in JavaScript. There's no getting around that. JavaScript is a terrible language that is incredibly wasteful of memory. It manages it very poorly. It does have a garbage collector, but the fact of the matter is that it uses an enormous amount of RAM to do what little it does. It is a terrible language, and the world only stuck with it for so long because there were no alternatives. Browsers only recognized JavaScript. There was no way to make websites without using it. You were stuck on the front end side of development, for the web at least, using JavaScript and PHP were the only languages that it was able to process. And so you have all these terrible front end languages for the web. But it's why websites are so terrible and why they take up so much memory and why they hog it like nothing else, before. And then, on top of that, you have a deliberate effort by the browser companies to do this, to, to do what we're seeing in our process viewer, which is to launch each and every website in a separate instance of the browser. Chrome does this too, and it does that because if one of them crashes and closes out, it doesn't want it to make all of them crash at the same time. It doesn't want that. It wants to avoid that at all possible cost. And so, you know, the web browsing the web is absolutely an enormous task for a computer. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be. You would think it was lightweight. It's very counterintuitive that it is as much as it is, but it is that way because browsers for a long time only recognized PHP and JavaScript. That was the only languages that we had on the front end, and as a result, all the web apps and everything are just absolutely garbage piles of enormous size. And so, anyways, the point about all this is that VS Code is a joke, and the fact is that VS Codium is no better. You can't fix it. The thing is that VS Code is broken beyond repair. It is so bloated that you can't fix it by going over to VS Codium. You just can't.